Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. I'm going to be reading again from this particular book, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by Mr. Anthony C. Sutton. This is chapter 9 I'm going to be reading from, which is entitled The Guarantee Trust Goes to Russia. So what we are seeing here and involved in is a group of people who are put in a illegitimate government and threw out the czar. It was a so-called revolution, but the revolution was basically for themselves, that is to benefit. They knew they could not come into Russia at that point to do what they were doing, meaning that simply is that they would have had to go through the correct procedures to set up a way of coming into the country, and that was not going to be allowed by the czar. And so what they did was simply is they hired a few cronies who were involved with the Communist Party, or so-called Communist Party, in order to go in and overthrow the government. And they did it through basically money and through the media giving support to that. So let's get into chapter 9. It's called Guarantee, Guaranty, Trust Goes to Washington. The Soviet government desired guaranteed trust company to become physical agent in the United States for all Soviet operations and contemplates American purchase Eastern Bank with a view to complete linking of the Soviet fortunes with American financial institutions. So what's going on here is just that this whole dilemma is it's about the bankers and it's about the industrials. They're so keen with making their money and taking other plunder, as I would call it, from foreign countries, and they've been doing it ever since, folks. Even the IMF is involved with that, International Monetary Fund. And so what has transpired is simply is that they get steals. In other words, they get these particular areas in that country and steal from the people, which actually is a country, you see. And they rape the land also. Not only do they rape the people, but they rape the land. So in 1918, the Soviet faced a bewildering array of internal and external problems. They occupied a mere fraction of Russia. To subdue the remainder, they needed foreign arms. Yes, they needed because they're going to enslave these people. They wanted to import food because basically they're going to begin to use that tool against them also. And they're going to cause enormous problems with peasants because most of the peasants got enamored with these people and thought this was going to be a great thing. And it turned out to be the worst nightmare. They thought it was bad during the Tsar rule. It's far worse than ever will be. Outside financial support, diplomatic recognition, and above all, see, they want to be legitimate, you see, and foreign trade. To gain diplomatic recognition and foreign trade, the Soviets first needed representation abroad, and representation in turn required financing through gold or foreign currencies. As we have already seen, the first step was to establish the Soviet Bureau in New York under Ludwig Martins. At the same time, efforts were made to transfer funds to the United States and Europe for purchases of needed goods. Then influence was exerted to the U.S. to gain recognition or attain the export license needed to ship goods to Russia. So you see what they're trying to legitimize their government. But in the eyes of, if people knew this was an illegitimate government. All governments actually are illegitimate in reality, folks. Think about it. And this is a way for corporations to take more and more and pillage the people and pillage everything that would be an opportunity to benefit the people there in Russia. New York bankers and lawyers provide significant, in some cases critical, assistance for each of these tasks. When Professor George B. Lomonosov, that's Lomonossoff. The Russian techno expert in the Soviet Bureau needed to transfer funds from the chief Soviet agent in Scandinavia. A prominent Wall Street attorney came to his assistance using official State Department channels. See, that's illegal, right there. And the acting Secretary of State as a intermediary. Now remember, we have one of the worst presidents of all time in the United States. Is to do with Mr. Woodrow Wilson, and he's got a bunch of cronies in his office, folks, a ton of them. He's got business people who actually have put him in office also. Let's get on to this point here. When gold had to be transferred to the United States, it was American International Corporation, which was a dummy corporation, folks. That's what it was. Kumlo and Company and Guarantee Trust that requested the facilities and used their influence in Washington to smooth the way. And when it came to recognition, we find American firms pleading with Congress and with the public to endorse the Soviet regime. Lest the reader should deduce too hastily from these assertions that Wall Street was indeed tinged with red, or that red flags were flying in the street. That is, we also in a later chapter present evidence that the J.P. Morgan firm financed Admiral Kolchak in Siberia. Alexander Kolchak was fighting the Bolsheviks. Do you get it? You see what's going on here, folks? To install his own brand of authoritarian rule. So those are the part. This is talking about the Civil War that took place after Lenin's, well, actually before Lenin's death, and when Mr. Trotsky was involved with the Red Army. So you see they're funding both sides here. You see that? Immensely they are. You betcha they are. The firm also contributed to anti-communist United American organizations. Another dummy. See, this is what they do. This is why you see this right and left paradigm always is involved. That each side is fighting such and such. But in reality, it's usually the left is actually winning. It's to give you an idea that you're fighting something, that you're throwing your money and your time away with these kind of guys. In reality, simply is the progression is continuing to be communism at that point. Wall Street comes to the aid of Professor Lomonosov. The case of Professor Lomonosov is a detailed case history of Wall Street assistance of the early Soviet regime. In late 1918, George V. Lomonosov, member of the Soviet Bureau in New York and later first Soviet Commissar of Railroads, found himself stranded in the United States without funds. At this time, Bolshevik funds were denied entry into the United States. Indeed, there was no official recognition of the regime at all. Lomonosov was the subject of a letter of October 24, 1918, from the U.S. Department of Justice to the Department of State. The letter referred to Lomonosov's Bolshevik attributes, and pro-Bolshevik speeches. The investigator concluded that Professor Lomonosov is not a Bolshevik, although his speeches constitute unequivocally support for the Bolshevik cause. Yet Lomonosov was able to pull strings at the highest level of the administration to have $25,000 transferred from the Soviet Union to a Soviet espionage agent in Scandinavia, who was himself later to become confidential assistant to Reeve Schreider, Schley, a vice president of Chase Bank. Same banks are involved here, folks, that are still here today. All this with the assistance of a member of a prominent Wall Street firm of attorneys. The evidence is pressed in detail because the details themselves point up to the close relationship between certain interests that up to now have been thought of as enemies. The first indication of Lomonosov's problem is the letter dated January 7, 1919, from Thomas L. Chadbourne of Chadbourne, Babbitt v. wall, that is the wall of the 14th Wall Street, same name, same address as William Boyce Thompson, to Frank Polk, Acting Secretary of State. I should say Polk, P-O-L-K, sorry about that. Note that the friendly salutations and casual references to Michael Grumsenberg, alias Alexander Gomberg, chief Soviet agent in Scandinavia and later Lomashot's assistant. I get a feeling simply they keep changing their names here as being someone else. You see, they're playing a game here, but it's a very serious game. Dear Frank, you are kind enough to say that if I could inform you of the status of the $25,000 items of personal funds belonging to Mr. and Mrs. Lamashot, you would set in motion the machinery necessary to attain it here for them. I have communicated with Mr. Lamashot with respect to it, and he tells me that Mr. Michael Grumsberg, who went to Russia for Mr. Lamashot prior to the difficulties between Ambassador Bobantel and Mr. Lamashot, transmitted the information to him respecting this money through 3 Russians who recently arrived from Sweden. And Mr. Lamashot believes that the money is held at the Russian embassy in Stockholm. Memeskel Gaten, G-A-T-E-N, if inquired from the State Department, should develop this to be not the place where the money is on deposit, then the Russian embassy in Stockholm can give the exact address of Mrs. Grusenberg, who has given the proper information respecting it. Mr. Lamashot does not receive letters from Mr. Grusenberg, although he is informed that they have been written, nor have any of the letters to Mr. Grusenberg been delivered. He is also informed, for this reason, it is impossible to be more definite than I have been, but I have hoped something can be done to relieve his and his wife's embarrassment, lack of funds, and if only needs a little help to secure this money which belongs to them to aid them on this side of the water. Thanking you in advance for anything you can do, I beg to remain as ever. Yours sincerely, Thomas L. Schackberg, C-H-A-D-B-O-U-R-N-E. In 1919, at the time this letter was written, Schackberg was $1 a year man in Washington, counsel and director of the U.S. War Trade Board, and a director of the U.S. Russian Bureau Incorporated, an official front company of the U.S. government. Previously, in 1915, Schauberg organized Midvale Steel and Ordnance to take advantage of war business. You see what's going on here, folks. In 1916, became chairman of the Democratic Financial Committee and later a director of Wright Aeronautics and of Mack Trucks. That's interesting. Also, he's later a director of Wright Aeronautics, so that must be connected to the Wright brothers, is what I'm guessing. And a Mack Trucks would be simply as in the future would be used to builders of trucks, which would be might be to do with Army ordinances, not ordinances, but Army vehicles. The reason Lamashot was not receiving letters from Grusenberg is that they were, in all probability, being intercepted by one of several government taking a keen interest in the latter activity. On January 11, 1919, Frank Polk cabled the American legation in Stockholm. The department is a receipt of information that $25,000 personal funds of so-and-so. Kindly inquire of the Russian legation, informative and personal, if such funds are held thus. This is in other words, this is a communique here. As certain, if not, address of Mr. Michael Grunsberg, reported to be a possession of information on this subject. Department not concerned officially, merely undertaking inquiries, I should say, on behalf of the former Russian officer, Mr. official in this country. Polk appears in this letter to be unaware of Lamashot's Bolshevik connection and refers to him as a former Russian official in the country. Be that as it may, in 3 days, Polk receives a reply from Morris at the U.S. legation in Stockholm. January 14th, 3 p.m. Sum of $25,000 of former president of Russian Commission of Ways and Communication in the United States, not known to Russian legation. Neither can address of Mr. Michael Gruensberg be obtained. Apparently, Frank Polk then wrote to Schackberg. The letter is not included in the source and included that state could find neither Lamasak nor Michael Gruensberg. Schackberg replied on January 21st, 1919. Dear Frank, this I'm thinking is talking about Frank Polk it is. Many thanks for your letter of January 17th. I understand that there are two Russian delegations in Sweden, one being the Soviet and the other the Kerensky, and I presume your inquiry was directly to the Soviet legation as that was the address I gave you in my letter, namely from Stockholm. Michael Gruensberg address is Holmenkollen Sanitarium, Christiania, Norway, and I think the Soviet legation could find out all about the funds through Grusenberg if they will communicate with him. Thank you for taking the time and trouble and assuring you of my deep appreciation. I remain. Sincerely yours, Thomas L. Schackberg. We should note that a Wall Street lawyer had the address of Grusenberg, chief Bolshevik agent in Scandinavia, at a time when the acting Secretary of State and the U.S. Stockholm legation had no record of the address, nor could the legation track it down. Schackberg also presumed that the Soviets were the official government of Russia, although that government was not recognized by the United States, and Schackberg's official government position on the War Trade Board would require him to know that. Frank Polk then cabled the American legation at Christiania, Norway, with the address of Michael Gruensberg. It is not known whether Polk knew he was passing on the address of the espionage agent, but his message was as follows. To the American legation, Christina, Sweden, January 25th, 1919, it is reported that Michael Gruensberg is at Holmenkollen Sanitarium. It is possible for you to locate him and inquire if he has any knowledge respecting this disposition of $25,000. Funds belongs to former president of Russian Mission of Ways of Communication in the United States, Professor Lemonstraw. Polk, acting, that is the U.S. representative Christina knew Grusenberg well. Indeed, the name had figured in reports from Scandinavia to Washington concerning Grusenberg's pro-Soviet activities in Norway. January 29 at 8 p.m. Another telegram. Before departing today for Russia, Michael Gruensberg informed our naval attaché that when in Russia some few months ago, he had received at Lemonstraw's request $25,000 from the Russian Railway Experimental Institute, of which Professor Lemonstraw was president. Grusenberg claims that today he cabled attorney for Lemonstraw in New York, Morris Hillquit, that's Hillquit, that he, Grusenberg, is in possession of the money and before forwarding it, awaiting further instructions from the United States, requesting in the cablegram that Lemonstraw be furnished with living expenses for himself and family by Hillquit pending the receipt of the money. As Minister Morris was traveling to Stockholm on the same train as Grusenberg, the latter stated that he would advise further with Morris in reference to the subject. The U.S. minister traveled with Grusenberg to Stockholm, where he received the following cable from Polk. It's reported by legation at Christina that Michael Grusenberg has for Professor G. Lemonstraw the sum of $25,000 received from Russian Railway Experimental Institute. If you can do so without being involved with the Bolshevik authorities, the department will be glad for you to facilitate transfer of this money to Professor Lemonstraw in this country. Kindly reply, Polk. This cable produces results for on February 5th, 1919, Frank Polk wrote to Schackberg about a dangerous Bolshevik agitator, Grusenberg. My dear Tom, I have a telegram from Christiana indicating that Michael Grusenberg has the $25,000 of Professor Lemonstraw and received it from the Russian Railway Experimental Institute, and that he had cabled Morris Hillquit at New York to furnish Professor Lemonstraw's money for living expenses until the fund in question can be transmitted to him, as Grusenberg has just been reported from Norway as a dangerous Bolshevik agitator. He may have had difficulties in telegraphing from that country. I understand he has now gone to Christiania, and while it's somewhat out of the department line of action, I shall be glad if you wish to see if I can have Mr. Grusenberg remit the money to Professor Lemonstraw from Stockholm. And I'm telegraphing our minister there to find out if that can be done. Again, this is from very sincerely yours, Frank L. Polk. So you see who's involved in here, folks. The telegram from Christina refers to in Polk's letters reads as follows. This is a telegram referring Department January 12th, $10,000 has now been deposited in Stockholm to my order to be forwarded to Professor Lamostraat by Michael Grusenberg, one of the former representatives of the Bolsheviks in Norway. I informed him before accepting this money that I would communicate with you and inquire if it is your wish that this money be forwarded to Lamostraat. Therefore, I request instructions as to my course of action. Morris. Subsequently, Morris in Stockholm requested disposal, of instructions for a $10,000 draft deposit in Stockholm Bank. His phrase, this has been my only connection with the affair, suggests that Morris was aware that the Soviets could and probably would claim that this is an official expeditious monetary transfer, since this action implied approval by the U.S. of such monetary transfers. Up to this time, the Soviets have been required to smuggle money into the United States. So we have a mole within the office of President Woodrow Wilson? Maybe. With reference to my February 3rd, 6 p.m., another telegram, and your February 8th, 7 p.m., it's not clear to me whether it is your wish for me to transfer through you the $10,000 referral to Professor Lamostraat, being advised by Grusenberg that he had deposited this money to the order of Lamostraat in a Stockholm bank, and has advised the bank that this draft could be sent to America through me. Provided I so ordered, has been my own connection with the affair. Kindly wire instructions, Morris. Then follows a series of letters on the transfer of the $10,000 from /B Norstisch Rosenbureau to Thomas L. Schackenberg at 520 Park Avenue, New York City, through the medium of the State Department. The first letter contains instruction from Pope on the mechanics of the transfer. The second, from Morris to Pope, contains $10,000. The third, from Morris to A.B. Nordisch Rosenberg Bureau, requests a draft. The fourth is a reply from the bank with a check, and the fifth is the acknowledgement. Money may be transferred directly to Thomas L. Schackenberg, 520 Park Avenue, New York City. Again, the Honorable Secretary of State, Washington. Sir, referring to my telegram number 3610 of February 12th and to the Department reply number 1524 of February 19th in regard to the sum of $10,000 for Professor Lamostraat, I have the honor herewith to enclose a copy of the letter which I addressed on February 25th to A.B. Nordisch Rosenberg Bureau, the bankers with whom this money was deposited. A copy of the reply of A.B. Nordisch Rosenberg Bureau, dated February 26, and a copy of my letter to A.B. Nordisch Rosenberg Bureau on February 27. It was seen from the correspondence that the bank was desirous of having this money forward to Professor Lamostraat. I explained to them, however, as we will be seeing from my letter of February 27th, that I have received authorization to forward it directly to Mr. Thomas L. Schackenberg at 520 Park Avenue, New York City. I also enclose herewith an envelope addressed to Mr. Schackenberg, in which are enclosed a letter to him together with a check on the National City Bank of New York for $10,000. I have the honor to be, sir, your obedient servant, Ira N. Morris. Continue. Another particular telegram here is, gentlemen, upon receipt of your letter of January 30th, stating that you had received $10,000 to be paid out to Professor G.B. Lamostraat on my request, I immediately telegrammed to my government asking whether they wish this money forward to Professor Lamostraat. I am today in receipt of a reply authorizing me to forward the money directly to Mr. Thomas L. Schackenberg, payable to Professor Lamostraat. I shall be glad to forward it as instructed by my government. I am, gentlemen, very truly yours, Ira N. Morris. So he's using all these particular cable telegrams, such and such, and these are a way of putting this thing together as they've been working together, and people, government officials are involved in this. The American minister in Stockholm, dear sir, we beg to acknowledge the receipt of your favor of yesterday's regarding payment of $10,000, Professor G.B. Lamostraat, and we hereby have the pleasure to enclose a check for said amount to the other order of Professor G.B. Lamostraat, which we understand that you are kindly forwarding to this gentleman. We We shall be glad to have your receipt for same and beg to remain. Yours respected, A.B. Nordish, Rose Bureau. Kenyon, there's a communication here with Stockholm. Again, it's another communique. Gentlemen, I beg to acknowledge the receipt of your letter, February 26th, enclosing a check for $10,000 payable to Professor G.B. Lamerstock. As I advised you in a letter of February 25th, I have been authorized to forward this check to Mr. Thomas L. Schockberg at 520 Park Avenue, New York City, and I shall forward it to the gentleman within the next few days unless you indicate a wish to this contrary. Again, this is from Ira N. Morris. Mr. Phillips to Mr. Schockberg on April 3rd, 1919. Sir, referring to previous correspondence regarding a remittance of $10,000 from A.B. Nordish, Rose Bureau, to Professor G.B. Lamerstock, which you request to be transmitted through the American Legation of Stockholm, the department informs you that it is in receipt of a dispatch from the American Minister of Stockholm dated March 6, 1919, covering the enclosed letter addressed to you, together with a check for the amount referred to, drawn to the order of Professor Lamerstock. I am, sir, your obedient servant, William Phillips, Acting Secretary of State. So you have key people here involved. Enclosed a sealed letter addressed by Mr. Thomas L. Sharper, enclosed with 1,600 from Sweden. I don't know what that's about. I'm just reading what he's sharing here. Reply, Mr. Schockberg, April 5th, 1919. Sir, I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter of April 3rd, enclosing letter addressed to me, containing check for $10,000 drawn to the order of Professor Lamerstock, which check I have today delivered. I beg to remain with great respect, very truly yours, Thomas L. Schockberg. Subsequently, the Stockholm legation inquiring concerning Lamerstock's address in the United States and was informed by the State Department that as far as the department is aware, Professor George B. Lamerstock can be reached in care of Thomas L. Schockberg at 520 Park Avenue, New York City. It is evident that the State Department, for the reasons either or personal friendship between Polk and Schockberg or political influences, felt it had to go along and act as a bagman for a Bolshevik agent just ejected from Norway. But why would a prestigious establishment law firm be so intimately interested in the health and welfare of a Bolshevik emissary? Perhaps a contemporary State Department report gives the clue. Martins, that is, the Bolshevik representative, and Professor Lamerstock are banking on the fact that Bullock and his party will make a favorable report to the mission and the president regarding conditions in Soviet Russia, and that on the basis of this report, the government of the United States will favor dealing with the Soviet government as proposed by Martins, March 29, 1919. The stage is set for commercial exploitation of Russia. It was commercial exploration of Russia that incited Wall Street. You bet it did. And Wall Street had lost no time in preparing his program on May 1st, 1918. Again, I've said this emphasis a couple of talks before. If the Federal Reserve Bank was never created, none of this would have taken place, folks. Never would have taken place because they didn't have the money at that time to transfer all this type of thing. Because they're creating money out of nothing also, and that's going to be later on. And I'm going to be doing videos on that. I have done quite a few of them also myself. And the report simply isn't almost all presidents. I don't know about Calvin Coolidge. That I don't know much about him. He's the president after Woodrow Wilson, and then after that, you have Mr. Hoover comes in office, and he is not what we call an angel. Okay. He is involved in doing things to help to keep the Germans in the war. And I've talked about that with him, helping out a group in Belgium. And in fact, when he did that, that allowed him to get in there. He was basically a stooge, but Hoover was a rich man. He wasn't a poor man. He wasn't a middle income guy. He was a very well off set man. And you notice that Roosevelt wasn't either. So it was commercial exploitation, I should say, of Russia that decided Wall Street, and Wall Street had lost no time in preparing his programs on May 1st, 1918. A suspicious date for the Red Revolution? Yes, very much so. May Day. Yeah, May 1st. People celebrate that day also, not knowing it's a Bolshevik day. It's a communist day. It also ties in with Um, I'm trying to think of the group. I can't think of it right now, but it ties in with also what I call secret groups. Auspicious date for Red Revolutionaries. The American League to Aid and Cooperate with Russia was established and its program approved in a conference held in the Senate Office Building, Washington, D.C. The officers and executive committee of the League represented some superficial disseminatory factions. Its president was Dr. Frank J. Goodnow, president of Johns Hopkins University. Vice presidents were Vice presidents were the ever active William Boyce Thompson. This guy is still there. He's involved. Oscar S. Strauss, James Duncan, and Frederick C. Howe, who wrote Confessions of a Monopolist, the rule book by which monopolists could control society. Might need to get that book. It'd be interesting book, The Confessions of a Monopolist. The treasurer was George P. Whalen, W-H-A-L-E-N, vice president of Vacuum Oil Company. Congress was represented by Senator William Edward Borah, I should say B-O-R-A-H, and Senator John Sharp Williams of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator William N. Calder, C-A-L-D-E-R, and Senator Robert L. Owens, chairman of the Banking and Currency Committee. House members were Henry R. Cooper and Henry D. Flood. Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, American Business was represented by Henry Ford, Charles A. Coffin, chairman of the board of General Electric Company, and M.A. Ogden, O-U-D-I-N, then foreign manager of General Electric, George P. Whalen, again representing Vacuum Oil Company, and Daniel Willard was president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. We call it the B&O here. The more overly revolutionary elements was represented by Mr. Raymond Robbins, whose name was later found to be prominent in the Soviet Bureau files and in the Lust Committee hearings. Henry L. Slobodin, S-L-O-B-O-D-I-N, described as a prominent patriotic socialist, and Lincoln Stephanus, as we've known before, a domestic communist of note. In other words, this was a hybrid executive committee. It represented domestic revolutionary elements, the Congress of the United States, and the financial interest proximity involved with Russian affairs. Approved by the Executive Committee was a program that emphasized the establishment of an official Russian division in the U.S. government, directed by strong men. The division would enlist the aid of universities, scientific organizations, and other institutions to study the Russian question, would coordinate and unite organizations within the United States for the safeguarding of Russia, would arrange for a special intelligence committee, the investigation of the Russian matter, and generally would itself study and investigate what was deemed to be the Russian question. The Executive Committee then passed a resolution supporting President Woodrow Wilson's message to the Soviet Congress in Moscow, and the League affirmed its own support for the new Soviet Russia. So you see that Woodrow Wilson's involved in this. He's a despicable man. He had what we call a cloth of decency somewhat, and that's how he fooled people. He also was a son of a preacher man. A few years later, on May 20th, 1918, Frank J. Goodnow and Herbert A. Carpenter, representing the League, called upon the Assistant Secretary of State, William Phillips, and impressed upon him the necessity for establishing official Russian division of the government to coordinate all Russian matters. So the government's getting their foot into this part here, see, because they're getting paid off here, folks. That's what's going on. They're getting paid off, so we're going to have to create a division here and deal with this whole issue. You see, it's no longer we're not going to be doing it in the secret, so to speak. Now we're going to bring it a little bit more out in the open and and that's what they're trying to do officially, is to recognize the Soviet Union as a country, a legitimate government. They asked me, wrote Phillips, whether they should take this matter up with the president. Phillips reported this directly to the Secretary of State, and on the next day wrote Charles R. Crane, New York City, requiring his views on the American League to aid and cooperate with Russia. Phillips besought Crane, I really want your advice as to know how we should treat the League. We do not want to stir up trouble by refusing to cooperate with them. On the other hand, it is a queer committee, and I don't quite get it. In early June, there arrived at the State Department a letter from William Franklin Sands of American International Corporation for Secretary of State Robert Lansing. Sands proposes that the United States appoint an administrator in Russia rather than a commission, and opted that the suggestion of an allied military force in Russia at the present moment seems to me to be a very dangerous one. So again, the troops are still there. This is based upon in 1919. Okay. Sands emphasized the possibility of trade with Russia, and the possibility could be advanced by a well-chosen administrator enjoying the full confidence of the government. He indicated that Mr. Hoover might fit that role. The letter was passed to Phillips by Basil Miles, a former associate of Sands, with the expression, "I think the secretary would find it worthwhile to look through." In early June, the War Trade Board, you see, all this is, you got to figure this out. These guys are, with the whole establishment of the Federal Reserve System, it allows this to take place. This allows what I would call, these people who were call questionable at one point, this allows these people to get involved in this because they're going to be benefited in some way. And then again, like I say, they create money out of nothing. They actually don't, but they basically get it, the Treasury Department to print it up for them. They charge them, they do that. And it's based upon the credit of the American people. That's what it's based upon, folks. And we're giving all this, we're giving money away and doing all this kind of stuff, that is these bankers and such and such. But in reality, within a few years, we're going to be going through the Depression. It never solved the problem. The Federal Reserve never solved the problem. All they did was got their own people in those positions so that they could make money and create bankruptcy eventually in the United States to make it even worse. And that's over 100 years ago, folks. You imagine what it's like now. We give money away to all kinds of countries out there and all kinds of organizations that are not actually beneficial for us as the country, but it's beneficial for those who are in business or people who want to overthrow those other countries or to cause overthrow this country. In early June, the War Trade Board, subordinated to the State Department, passed a resolution in a committee of the board comprising Thomas L. Schackberg, that is, Professor Amistad Contact, Clarence M. Woolley, and John Foster Dulles submitted a memorandum of the Department of State urging consideration of ways and means to bring about closer and more friendly commercial relations between the United States and Russia. This is all trade, folks. This is what this is about. It's commercial. It has nothing to do with the people. The board recommended a mission to Russia and reopened the question whether this should result from an invitation from the Soviet government. Then on June 10th, M.A. Ogden, Oudin, foreign minister of General Electric. So these are major people in major corporations now. And I'm sure the General Electric company is in the business of electricity, or not electricity, but motors and all that kind of stuff that will be used for electricity. And Russia is what we would call a country that's second world country, possibly third world, doesn't have all these benefits. That is, it may be in the major cities, but they want to exploit and make money. You see, this is what it's about. It expressed these views on Russia and clearly favored a constructive plan for the economic assistance of Russia. In August of 1918, Cyrus M. McCormick of International Harvester wrote to Basil Miles at the State Department and praised the president's programs for Russia, which McCormick thought would be a golden opportunity. Yes, the town here in South Carolina called McCormick, South Carolina, is actually named after Cyrus M. McCormick. So he's interested in selling his farm equipment, you see. Now it says he thought would be a golden opportunity. He's got it in quotes here. So these guys are, you think they're good people, but then you realize, what are they doing in the background here? Consequently, we find in mid-1918 a concerted effort by a segment of American business, obviously prepared to open up trade to take advantage of its own preferred position regarding the Soviets. The next section is called Germany and the United States struggling for Russian business. So there's a competition here, folks. In 1918, such assistance to the Bolshevik regime was justified on the grounds of defeating Germany and inhibiting Germany's exploitation, I should say, of Russia. This was the argument used by W.B. Thompson and Raymond Robbins in sending Bolshevik revolutionaries and propaganda teams into Germany in 1918. The argument was also employed by Thompson in 1917 when conferring with Prime Minister Lord George. You remember him, the British Prime Minister, who really is involved in this, not understanding what is going on, about attaining British support for the emerging Bolshevik regime. Well, he does understand, but he doesn't see what's going to cause more problems in the future. But they're not interested in that, you see. It's what's now, not tomorrow. In June 1918, Ambassador Francis and his staff returned from Russia and urged President Wilson to recognize and aid the Soviet government of Russia. So they want the government, the federal government, to begin to give money. Now, see, they've given the bankers and the corporations here in America already given their money. Now what they want is our government to now begin to recognize the Soviet Union so that they can give money to them from the hard sweat of the taxpayers here. You see? These reports made by the embassy staff to the State Department were leaked to the press and widely printed. Above all, it was claimed that delay in recognizing the Soviet Union would aid Germany. So they're afraid of the Germany will get involved in this. And you're looking at two industrial powers. You're seeing that England is gradually dissipating as an economic power. Not quite, but after the World War II, they are completely nowhere near what they were 100 years before. So what's happening now is Germany is that part, since they're much closer to the Soviet Union, they're a legitimate threat by the United States. And so you've got these two major industrial powers now trying to get into Russia, and that would be the Soviet Union, as to say. Above all, it was claimed that delay to recognize the Soviet Union would, that is, aid Germany and help the German plan to foster reaction and counter-revolution. Exaggerated statistics were cited to support this proposal. For example, that the Soviet government represented 90% of the Russian people, and the other 10% is the former proletariat and government class. Naturally, they are displeased. A former American official was quoting as saying, if we do nothing, that is, if we just let things drift, we help weaken the Russian Soviet government, which is what you want to do, you see. And that plays in Germany's hands, which is not true. Or is it? See, there's a fear here or something. We're going to miss out on something. So it's recommended that a commission armed with credit and good business advice could help much. Meanwhile, inside, this is all to benefit the capitalists, folks. This is all to benefit the bankers. This is all to benefit the industrials. That's what this is about. Meanwhile, inside Russia, the economic situation has become critical, and the inevitability of an embrace with capitalism dawned on the Communist Party and its planners. Lenin, that has crystallized his awareness before the 10th Congress of the Russian Communist Party. Without the assistance of capital, it will be impossible for us to retain proletariat power in this incredibly ruined country, in which the peasantry, also ruined, constitutes the overwhelming majority. And of course, for this assistance, capital will squeeze 100% out of us. This is what we have to understand. Hence, either this type of economic relationship or nothing. They're dependent. They've always been dependent upon foreigners, folks. Soviet Union's always been dependent upon foreigners because they're a communist government. They don't know how to run anything because they squeeze all the freedoms away from people. Then Leon Trotsky was quoted as saying, what we need here is a organizer such as Bernard M. Baruch, B-A-R-U-C-H. That's a key person. Write that down. Soviet awareness of impending economic doom suggested American and German business were attracted by the opportunity of exploiting the Russian market for needed goods. The Germans, in fact, made an early start in 1918. The first deals made by the Soviet Bureau in New York indicate that early American finance and moral support of the Bolsheviks was paying off in the form of contracts, you see. The largest order in 1919 and 20 was contracted to Morris, M-O-R-R-I-S, and Company out of Chicago, that is the meat packers, for 50 million pounds of food products valued at approximately $10 million. The Morris meatpacking family was related to the Swift family. Helen Swift, later connected with the Abraham Lincoln Center in Unity, was married to Edward Morris, Morris, of the meatpacking firm, and was also the brother of Harold H. Swift, a major in the 1917 Thompson Red Cross mission to Russia. Now it shows a table here showing the contracts made in 1919 by the Soviet Bureau with U.S. firms. That was what it's speaking of. Lockwood Martins was formerly vice president of Weinberger and Paul Posner, located at 120 Broadway, New York City, and this firm was given a $3 million order. Soviet gold and American banks. Gold was the only practical means by which the Soviet Union could pay for its foreign purchases, and the international bankers were quite willing to facilitate Soviet gold tracing. Sure, you betcha they would. No doubt about that. They're robbing these people, folks. That's what they're doing. They're robbing them. This is what the bankers are doing. And then they're also including the industrials so they can ship products overseas in order to benefit again. Russian gold exports, primarily imperial gold coins, started in 1920 to Norway and Sweden. These were transshipped to Holland and Germany for other world destinations, including the United States. You see what's going on here? This is financial rape. And they chose the most dastardly people to murder these Russians. All these guys wanted, that is, the communists, was to murder these people. They had a hatred towards them, immense hatred towards them. And they also wanted to punish the Tsar. So in August of 1920, a shipment of Russian gold coins was received at the Den Norsk Handelsbank Bank in Norway as a guarantee for payment of 3,000 tons of coal by Niels Joel and Company in the United States. That's Niels Joul and Company in the United States on behalf of the Soviet government. So you've got a country now that's dependent upon foreign trade. These coins were transferred to the Norge Bank for safekeeping. The coins were examined and weighed, were found to have been minted before the outbreak of war in 1914, and were therefore genuine Imperial Russian coins. This is what they did. They stole. They stole this. These bankers stole this. I'm not saying the czars were perfect. I'm just saying simply is they stole it from them. And I'm not saying it's basically robbing the people. Shortly after the initial reports or episodes, the Robert Dollar Company of San Francisco received gold bars valued at 39 million Swedish krona in its Stockholm account. The gold bore the stamp of the old Tsar government of Russia. The Dollar Company agent in Stockholm applied to the American Express Company for facilities to ship the gold to the United States. American Express refused to handle the shipment. Wow. Robert Dollar, it should be noted, was a director of the American International Company, thus American International Corporation, was linked to the first attempt at shipping gold directly to Americans. They didn't want any part of it. They knew this particular company, that is, the American Express Company, didn't want anything to do with it. They sensed that this was not good. Simultaneously, it was reported that 3 ships had left Revel on the Baltic Sea with Soviet gold destined for the U.S. The SS Gauthod, Gauthod, loaded 216 boxes of gold under the supervision of Professor Lomachenko, now returning to the United States. The SS Karl Line loaded 216 boxes of gold under the supervision of 3 Russian agents. The SS Helena Oliva was laden with 108 boxes of gold, each box containing 3 pools of gold valued at 60,000 gold rubles each. This was followed by the shipment of the SS Wheeling Mole. Kumlo and Company, apparently acting on behalf of the Guarantee Trust Company, then inquired the State Department concerning the official attitudes towards the receipt of Soviet gold. In a report, the department expressed concern because the acceptance was refused. Then the gold would probably come back on the hands of the War Department, causing thereby direct governmental responsibility and increased embarrassment. The report, written by Merle, M-E-R-L-E, Smith, in a conference with Kelly and Gilbert, argued that unless the possessors have definite knowledge as to imperfect title, it would be impossible to refuse acceptance. It was anticipated that the U.S. would be requested to melt the gold in the ASSAY office, and it was thereupon decided to telegram Kumlo and Company that no restrictions would be imposed on the importation of Soviet gold into the United States. The gold arrived at the New York ASAC office and was deposited not by Kumlo and Company, but by Guarantee Trust Company of New York City. Guarantee Trust then inquired the Federal Reserve Board. Wow, this is it, folks. Get it. Guarantee Trust then inquired the Federal Reserve Board, which in turn inquired the U.S. Treasury concerning acceptance and payment. The superintendent of the New York ASA office informed the Treasury that the approximately $7 million of gold and no identification marks, and that the bars deposit had already been melted in United States mint bars. They've been already dealt with. They no longer can trace them. The Treasury suggested that the Federal Reserve Board determine whether a Guarantee Trust Company had acted for its own account or the account of another in presenting the gold, and particularly whether or not any transfer of credit or exchange transaction has resulted from the importation or deposit of the gold. On November 10, 1920, A. Breton, B-R-E-T-O-N, a vice president of Guarantee Trust, wrote to Assistant Secretary Gilbert of the Treasury Department complaining that Guarantee had not received from the ASA office the usual immediate advance against deposits of yellow metal left with them for reduction. The letter states that Guarantee Trust had received satisfactory assurance that the bars were the product of melting French and Belgian coins, although it had purchased the metal in Holland. The letter requested that the Treasury expedient payment for the gold. In reply, the Treasury argued that it does not purchase gold tendered to the United States Mint or ASA office, which is known or suspected to be of Soviet origin. And in view of known Soviet sales of gold in Holland, the gold submitted by Guaranteed Trust Company was held to be a doubtful case, with suggestions of Soviet origins. It suggested that the Guarantee Trust Company could withdraw the gold from the ASA office at any time it wished or could present such further evidence to the Treasurer, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, or the Department of State as may be necessary to clear the gold of any suspicion of Soviet origin. So they're going to try to. This is amazing. They're going to dissipate where it came from. I'm not saying, again, like I said, the Tsar is good, but this is unbelievable, folks. It's about greedy people who think they are the epitome of life. And they're the lowest people, folks. They don't give a damn. They don't care anything about life. They don't care about anything except themselves. They're the classic psychopath. There is no file recorded concerning final disposition of the case, but presumably the Guarantee Trust Company was paid for the shipment. Obviously, this gold deposit was to implement the mid-1920 fiscal agreements between Guarantee Trust and the Soviet government, under which the company became the Soviet agent in the United States. It wasn't a government to government, it was to a private corporation or bank. It was determined at a later date that Soviet gold was also being sent to the Swedish Mint. The Swedish Mint melts Russian gold, assesses it, and affixes the Swedish Mint stamp at the request of Swedish banks or other Swedish subjects owning the gold. Owing the gold. At the same time, Olaf Ashkeberg, head of Slovensky Elnomia AB, the Soviet intermediate and affiliate of Guarantee Trust, was offering unlimited quantities of Russian gold to Soviet banks. Swedish banks, sorry. In brief, we can be American International Corporation, the influential Professor Lamastock, Guarantee Trust, and Olaf Ashkaberg, whom we previously identified to the first attempt to import Soviet gold into the United States. Let's continue. Max May of Guarantee Trust became director of Rushkombank Bank. Guarantee Trust interest in Soviet Russia was renewed in 1920 in the form of a letter from Henry C. Embry, assistant manager of the Foreign Department of Guarantee Trust, to DeWitt C. Poole in the State Department. The letter was dated January 21st, 1920, just a few weeks before Alan Walker, the manager of the Foreign Department, became active in forming the Variegan anti-Soviet organization United Americans. Embry posed numerous questions about the legal basis of the Soviet government and banking in Russia, and inquired whether the Soviet government was the de facto government in Russia. Revolt before 1922, planned by the Reds, claimed United Americans in 1920, but Guarantee Trust had started negotiation with these same Reds and was acting as a Soviet agent in the U.S. in mid-1920s. In January 1922, Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover interceded with the State Department on behalf of the Guarantee Trust scheme. This is the president, future president, folks. Scheme to set up exchange relations with the new state bank at Moscow. This scheme, wrote Herbert Hoover, would not be objectively if a stipulation were made that all monies coming into their possession should be used for the purchase of civilian commodities in the United States. And after asserting that such relation appeared to be in line with general policy, Hoover added, it might be advantageous to have these transactions organized in such a manner that we know what the movement is instead of disintegrated operations now current. Of course, such disintegrated operations are consistent with the operations of a free market, but the approach Herbert Hoover rejected in favor of channeling the exchange through specific and controllable sources in New York. The Secretary of State Charles E. Hughes expressed dislike of the Hoover Guarantee Trust scheme, which he thought could be regarded as the de facto recognition of the Soviets, while the foreign credits acquired might be used to the disadvantage of the United States. A non-committal reply was sent by state to Guarantee Trust. However, Guarantees went ahead with Herbert Hoover's support, participated in formation of the first Soviet International Bank, and Max May of Guarantee Trust became head of the Foreign Department of the new Rushkombank. That's Rushkombank. And that is the conclusion of this particular chapter, chapter 9. Some very detailed stuff here dealing with what I would call, it's just robbing, it's just stealing the money. It's just steal it right out in front here. So I appreciate you being here. Yes, I see someone here. Thank you for doing these readings. Yeah, thank you, Samara. I guess it's Samara, Samarah, Roth. Thank you for your kind comments. This information is important. We have to unravel all these type of things to understand how this is taking place. Now, you must remember, in less than 10 years, there's going to be a depression here in the United States. The bankers are a part of that also. So thank you. And if you appreciate this, I appreciate you sharing this with others so that we can educate others about what has happened in the past. It has not changed. It's still the same. This goes on and on as countries are plundered. And we can think about Libya as being one of the countries and other countries also. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. I wish you a good day. You take care.